Hey guys, tonight we journey back to one of the most brutal, filthy, and dangerous cities in human history. Medieval Paris. The City of Light? More like the City of Blight. This was a place where stepping outside meant dodging human waste, where drinking water could kill you faster than the plague, and where the smell alone might knock you unconscious. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations! You've just woken up in Paris, France. The year is 1325. The good news is, you're alive. The bad news is, you immediately regret it. Because the first thing that hits you isn't the romantic charm of medieval France, it's the smell. Sweet, merciful God. The smell. It's as if someone took 1,000 rotting fish, mixed them with human excrement, threw in some decomposing animals for good measure, and then let the whole thing ferment in the sun for 6 months. And that's just your bedroom. You're lying on a straw mattress that hasn't been changed since the reign of Philip the Fair, which ended 15 years ago. The straw is damp, mouldy, and home to more insects than a nature preserve. Your blanket is a piece of rough wool that smells like wet sheep and feels like it was woven by someone who had a personal grudge against comfort. The room you're in isn't really a room. It's more like a wooden box with pretensions. You're on the 4th floor of a timber-framed building that sways when the wind blows, creaks when people walk, and threatens to collapse whenever someone sneezes too hard. There are no windows in the modern sense, just holes in the wall covered with oiled parchment that lets in about as much light as a dirty jar. Privacy doesn't exist. You share this space with your entire family, which in medieval Paris means anywhere from 6 to 12 people, depending on how many relatives couldn't afford their own hovel. Your parents are snoring in the corner. Your siblings are tossing and turning on their own flea-infested mats. And somewhere in the darkness, you can hear the scratching of rats who have apparently decided that your home is their personal playground. The building you're in is 7 stories tall, which in 1325 Paris is basically a skyscraper. It's so narrow that you can literally reach out your window and shake hands with your neighbor across the street, assuming you want to risk falling 4 stories to your death just to be social. The ground floor houses a butcher shop, which explains why the entire building smells like blood, rotting meat, and the lingering despair of every animal that ever met its end down there. You try to sit up, and immediately every joint in your body screams in protest. You're 22 years old, which in medieval terms makes you practically elderly. Your spine feels like someone replaced your vertebrae with broken pottery. Your knees sound like a mill grinding grain, and your feet are so calloused they could probably be used as emergency horseshoes. This is what passes for the prime of your life in 1325 Paris. But you can't stay in bed, because in medieval Paris, staying in bed means not eating, and not eating means dying, which while sometimes seeming like an attractive option given your circumstances, is generally frowned upon by your family. So you swing your legs over the side of your straw mat, immediately step on something that squishes between your toes, and begin your day in the most magnificent city in medieval Europe. The first order of business is getting dressed, which is less about fashion and more about survival. You own exactly one outfit, and you've been wearing it for the past 3 months. It consists of a linen shirt that was once white but is now the color of old mustard, woolen hose that sag around your ankles like deflated balloons, and a tunic that has more holes than fabric. You don't have underwear because underwear hasn't been invented yet, and you don't have shoes because shoes are for rich people and clergy. Your feet are bare, calloused, and about to meet the medieval Parisian street system, which is less like walking and more like navigating an obstacle course designed by someone who really, really hates human feet. But we'll get to that nightmare in a moment. First, you need to deal with the immediate crisis of personal hygiene, which in medieval Paris is handled with all the sophistication of a cave painting. You stumble over to what passes for your family's washing area, which is a wooden bucket filled with water that was probably last changed during the Crusades. The water is brown, tepid, and has things floating in it that you really don't want to identify. This is your basin, your mirror, your bathtub, and your source of drinking water, all rolled into one magnificent vessel of medieval multitasking. You splash some of this ambiguous liquid on your face and immediately regret it. The water tastes like it was filtered through a horse, smells like it came from a swamp, and has the consistency of thin porridge. But it's all you've got, so you make the best of it. You run your wet fingers through your hair, which hasn't been properly washed in 6 months and has achieved the texture of old rope. You don't have a comb because combs are luxury items, and you definitely don't have soap because soap is for people who have given up on the natural smell of humanity. Your teeth. Oh, your poor teeth. They're loose, discolored, and many of them are missing entirely. The ones that remain are ground down from eating bread that contained more sand than grain, and they ache constantly with a dull, throbbing pain that reminds you with every bite that medieval dentistry consists mainly of prayer and pliers. You run your tongue over them and taste blood, which is just Tuesday in medieval Paris. By now, the sun has risen enough to filter through your oiled parchment window, casting everything in a sickly yellow light that makes your already miserable surroundings look even more depressing. Outside, you can hear the city coming to life. Horses clopping on cobblestones, merchants shouting their wares, dogs barking, chickens clucking, and underneath it all, the constant murmur of human misery that serves as the soundtrack to medieval urban life. You can also hear your stomach growling, which reminds you that you haven't eaten since yesterday afternoon, and that was just a piece of bread so hard it could have been used as a weapon. Time for breakfast, which in medieval Paris is less of a meal and more of a desperate attempt to get anything into your stomach before it starts digesting itself. Your family keeps their food supplies in a wooden chest that doubles as a table, a seat, and occasionally a bed when someone is too sick to climb the ladder to the sleeping area. You lift the heavy lid and peer inside at your family's wealth. A few pounds of grain that's only slightly green with mold, some dried fish that's harder than leather and smells like low tide, and a chunk of cheese that's more holes than dairy product. You grab a handful of grain and mix it with some of the questionable water to make a porridge that looks like something you might use to patch holes in the wall. It tastes about as good as it looks, with a texture somewhere between mud and sand, and a flavour that suggests the grain might have spent some quality time with the local rat population. But it's food, technically, and it fills the gnawing emptiness in your stomach, even if it creates a new gnawing concern about what exactly you just ate. There's no milk because the family cow died last winter, and there wasn't enough money to buy a new one. There's no fruit because fruit is seasonal and expensive, and this is February in Paris, which means everything fresh died months ago. There's no meat because meat is for special occasions like Christmas, Easter, or when someone in the family dies and you can afford to buy something for the funeral feast. What there is, however, is ale. Weak, sour, room-temperature ale that tastes like someone dissolved bread in swamp water and let it sit in the sun for a week. But it's safer to drink than the water, which in medieval Paris is saying something, because the water is basically liquid death with a hint of fish. So you gulp down a wooden cup of this alcoholic punishment and try to convince yourself that the slight burning sensation in your throat is just character building. Your breakfast is interrupted by the sound of someone retching violently in the next room, followed by the unmistakable sound of liquid hitting the floor. This is normal. In medieval Paris, someone is always sick, always vomiting, always dying of something that probably could have been prevented with basic hygiene and medical knowledge. But basic hygiene and medical knowledge are still a few centuries away, so instead you just listen to your neighbour's digestive distress and hope it's not contagious. By the time you've choked down your morning meal, the building around you has come fully alive with the sounds of medieval family life. Children crying, adults arguing, someone trying to fix something with a hammer, and the constant background noise of people living far too close together in far too small a space. The walls are thin, privacy is non-existent, and everyone knows everyone else's business whether they want to or not. Your father is already awake and preparing for his day as a fuller, which means he spends his time stepping on wet cloth to clean and thicken it. It's exhausting work that destroys your feet and fills your lungs with fiber dust. But it pays enough to keep the family from starving, most of the time. Your mother is preparing to head to the market, where she'll spend the day haggling over prices that seem designed to separate poor people from what little money they have. Your younger siblings are preparing for their own day of labor because in medieval Paris, childhood lasts until about age 7, at which point you become a contributing member of society, whether you like it or not. Your 10-year-old brother will spend the day running errands for local merchants, dodging horses, avoiding kidnappers, and trying not to get trampled by carts. Your 8-year-old sister will help your mother at the market, learning the fine art of spotting spoiled food, negotiating with cheating vendors, and carrying heavy baskets while avoiding the wandering hands of drunk customers. But before anyone can start their day of medieval drudgery, you all need to navigate the first great challenge of daily life in 1325 Paris: leaving the building. This sounds simple until you realize that your building has one staircase. It's made of wood that's older than memory, and it's currently being used by 14 families who all need to get to street level at roughly the same time. The staircase is narrow, steep, and slippery from years of wear and the occasional spilled chamber pot. There's no railing, no lighting, and definitely no building codes. People fall down these stairs regularly, and when they do, they usually take several other people with them. In a cascade of medieval misery, you grip the wall with one hand and pray to whatever saints handle staircase safety as you make your way down, step by treacherous step. The first floor of your building houses not just the butcher shop, but also a tavern, a small shrine to Saint Eligius, and what might charitably be called a bathroom, but is really just a corner where people relieve themselves when they can't make it outside. The smell down here is indescribable. It's like someone took every unpleasant odor in the world, concentrated them, and then added just a hint of despair for flavor. You push through the heavy wooden door and step outside into medieval Paris, and immediately understand why so many people spent their entire lives trying to leave this place. The street you emerge onto isn't really a street in any modern sense. It's more like a narrow canyon between buildings, paved with stones that have been worn smooth by centuries of foot traffic, horse hooves, and human waste. Speaking of human waste, that's the first thing you notice about Parisian streets. They're covered in it. Human excrement, horse dung, pig droppings, chicken waste, and the occasional dead animal that someone just left to rot where it fell. The city has an official policy about waste disposal. Throw it in the street and let God sort it out. There's supposed to be a warning system where people shout, "Gare l'eau," before dumping their chamber pots out the window. But in practice, this warning system works about as well as everything else in medieval Paris. Which is to say, not at all. You step carefully, trying to avoid the worst of the mess. But it's impossible. Your bare feet are immediately coated in a mixture of substances that you really don't want to think about too hard. The smell is overwhelming. A combination of sewage, rotting food, animal waste, and human despair that hits you like a physical force. You try breathing through your mouth, but that just means you're tasting it instead of smelling it, which is somehow worse. The street is barely wide enough for two people to pass each other, and when a cart comes through, everyone has to press themselves against the walls and hope they don't get crushed. The buildings on either side lean inward as they rise, creating a canyon effect that blocks out most of the sunlight and traps all the smells at street level. It's like walking through a tunnel made of timber, plaster, and concentrated human misery. But you can't stand still and contemplate the horror of your situation, because standing still in a medieval Paris street is dangerous. Carts pulled by oxen or horses thunder through without any regard for pedestrians. People on horseback gallop past, splashing everyone with mud and worse. And then there are the other pedestrians, who are just as desperate, hungry, and potentially dangerous as you are. Your first destination is the public well, because despite the horrifying state of everything else, you still need water to survive. The nearest well is 3 blocks away, which in medieval Paris terms is like traveling to another country. You join the line of people waiting to draw water, and immediately realize that this is going to be an adventure in human endurance. The line moves slowly because the well is deep, the rope is old, and the bucket has holes in it that someone patched with cloth and hope. While you wait, You're subjected to the full medieval Paris experience. People coughing in your face, children relieving themselves wherever they happen to be standing, merchants trying to sell you things you can't afford and wouldn't want if you could, and beggars who haven't eaten in days, looking at you like you might be edible. The woman in front of you is having an animated conversation with the woman behind you about someone named Marie, who apparently did something scandalous with a baker's apprentice. And now the whole neighborhood is talking about it. This is medieval entertainment. Gossip, rumors, and speculation about who's sleeping with whom and whether it's technically a sin given the complex web of family relationships that bind everyone in the neighborhood together. When you finally reach the well, you lower the bucket and pull up water that's brown, tepid, and has things floating in it that you really hope are just leaves. This is the good water, the safe water. The water that won't immediately kill you. You fill your ceramic jug, trying not to think about what happened to the last person who owned this jug, or why it has that suspicious stain around the rim. The water tastes like mud mixed with fish and seasoned with despair, but it's wet, and it's yours, and it won't kill you for at least a few hours, which in medieval Paris counts as a victory. You hoist the jug onto your shoulder and begin the treacherous journey back to your building, navigating the obstacle course of waste, animals, carts, and humans that makes up a typical Parisian street. Along the way, you pass the butcher shop that occupies the ground floor of your building, and you can see through the open door into a scene that would make a modern health inspector faint. Meat hangs from hooks in the open air, covered with flies and turning interesting colors in the heat. The floor is covered with blood, scraps, and substances that might once have been internal organs. The butcher himself is covered in gore from head to toe, wielding a cleaver that looks like it hasn't been cleaned since it was forged. But this is normal. This is how food is prepared in medieval Paris. There are no health codes, no refrigeration, no understanding of bacteria or food safety. Meat is slaughtered, butchered, and sold in conditions that would be considered unsanitary for disposing of garbage in the modern world. And people eat it anyway because the alternative is starving, and starving is generally considered worse than food poisoning, even if the margin is smaller than you'd like. You climb back up the death trap staircase to your floor, trying not to spill the precious water or fall to your death, both of which are significant challenges given the structural integrity of medieval Parisian architecture. Back in your room, you set down the water jug and take a moment to rest before beginning the real work of the day, trying to earn enough money to buy food so you can live long enough to repeat this process tomorrow. Your family's economic situation is what economists might call precarious. If economists existed in 1325, which they don't. Your father works when he can find work, your mother sells whatever she can make or find, and everyone else contributes whatever they can scrounge, steal, or earn through honest labor. It's a delicate balance between survival and disaster, and that balance can be upset by something as simple as a day of rain, a sick horse, or a merchant deciding he doesn't like your face. Today, your job is to help your mother at Les Halles, the great market of Paris. This might sound pleasant until you realize that Les Halles in 1325 is basically a giant outdoor cesspool where people happen to sell food. It's located in the center of the city, which means it's accessible to everyone, which also means it's crowded, loud, smelly, and dangerous. The walk to Les Halles takes you through some of the most picturesque neighborhoods in medieval Paris. If your definition of picturesque includes open sewers, buildings that look like they're held up by prayer and stubbornness, and streets so narrow that two people can't pass without getting uncomfortably intimate. You pass the construction site of Notre Dame Cathedral, which has been under construction for over 160 years and shows no signs of being finished anytime soon. The cathedral is impressive, towering over the surrounding buildings like a stone giant, but the construction site is a chaos of workers, materials, and accidents waiting to happen. Massive stones are being hauled up by pulleys and ropes that look like they might snap at any moment. Workers balance on scaffolding that seems to be held together by hope and gravity. And somewhere in that organized chaos, men are creating something beautiful and lasting, even if the process might kill them. But you don't have time to contemplate the majesty of Gothic architecture, because your mother is waiting for you at Les Halles, and being late means missing the best spots and the freshest merchandise. which in medieval terms means the food that's only slightly spoiled, instead of completely rotten. Le hal is a assault on every sense you have, and several you didn't know existed. The sound hits you first. Hundreds of people shouting, arguing, haggling, laughing, crying, and generally creating a din that could wake the dead. Merchants calling out their wares in voices that could shatter glass. Customers complaining about prices in voices that could curdle milk. Children crying because they're lost or hungry or both. Animals making the kinds of noises animals make when they know they're about to become dinner. Then comes the smell. If you thought your neighborhood smelled bad, Les Halles makes your neighborhood smell like a field of flowers. It's every unpleasant odor you can imagine concentrated into one open-air space. Rotting fish, spoiled meat, sour milk, human sweat, animal waste, and the sweet, cloying smell of things that died a long time ago and are still being sold as food. The visual assault is equally overwhelming. Stalls and booths crowd together in a maze that seems designed to confuse and disorient. Meat hangs from hooks, turning colors that don't exist in nature. Fish lie on tables, their dead eyes staring accusingly at anyone who dares to consider buying them. Vegetables that might once have been fresh are piled in baskets, slowly decomposing in the heat while flies use them as landing strips. And everywhere, people, merchants trying to sell anything to anyone, customers trying to buy food that won't kill them immediately, pickpockets working the crowd like farmers harvesting wheat, beggars pleading for scraps, guards trying to maintain some semblance of order, while mostly just adding to the chaos. And children, dozens of children, running around unsupervised, dodging horses, stealing food, and somehow managing to survive in conditions that would challenge a hardened criminal. You find your mother at her usual spot, a small space between a fishmonger whose merchandise smells like low tide and a baker whose bread looks like it was made from sawdust and determination. She's laid out her goods on a piece of cloth, some vegetables from the family garden that are only slightly wilted, eggs from chickens that may or may not still be alive, and some cloth that she's been weaving during the long winter evenings. Your job is to help her sell these items to people who have about as much money as you do, which is to say almost none. This means spending the day haggling over the price of eggs with people who are counting copper coins like they're pieces of gold. It means arguing about the quality of vegetables with customers who are just as hungry and desperate as you are. And it means trying to make enough money to buy the food you need to survive another day in medieval Paris. The haggling process is an art form in itself. Your mother starts by quoting a price that's roughly double what she expects to get. The customer responds with outrage, claiming that such a price would bankrupt their family and leave their children starving in the streets. Your mother expresses shock that anyone would suggest her goods aren't worth their asking price, given their obvious quality and freshness. The customer examines the merchandise closely, pointing out every flaw, every blemish, every sign of age or wear. This dance continues for several minutes, with each side making dramatic pronouncements about fairness, quality, and the general state of the economy. Other customers gather to watch, offering commentary and advice. Children circle like vultures, hoping someone will drop something edible. And through it all, your mother maintains a smile that could cut glass, while calculating in her head exactly how little she can accept and still afford to eat tonight. Eventually, a price is agreed upon that satisfies no one, but is acceptable to everyone. Money changes hands copper coins that are thin, worn, and have been handled by so many people they've achieved the texture of silk. The customer walks away muttering about highway robbery. Your mother counts the coins and sighs because it's not enough. It's never enough. But it's what she got, and it'll have to do. This process repeats throughout the day, with slight variations depending on the customer, the merchandise, and the general mood of the market. Some customers are reasonable and pleasant. Others act like you're personally responsible for everything wrong with their lives, and are determined to make you pay for it. Some pay promptly and politely. Others try to negotiate payment plans for a dozen eggs, as if eggs were a major capital investment requiring financing. Between customers, you get to observe the full spectrum of medieval Parisian life. Rich merchants stride through the market in their fine woolen robes, followed by servants carrying their purchases and clearing a path through the crowd. They buy the best food, the freshest meat, the finest cloth, and they pay without haggling, because haggling is beneath their dignity. They live in a different world from you, a world where food is abundant, clothing is warm, and death from preventable disease is not a daily concern. At the other end of the spectrum are the beggars, the homeless, the desperate. They hover around the edges of the market like ghosts, hoping for scraps, charity, or the chance to steal something small enough to go unnoticed. Some are disabled, missing limbs or bearing the marks of disease. Others are simply unlucky, victims of circumstances beyond their control. They exist in the shadow economy of medieval Paris, surviving on whatever they can find, beg, or steal. And then there's everyone else. People like you and your family, caught somewhere between poverty and starvation, working every day just to survive until tomorrow. You're the backbone of medieval Paris. The people who do the work, pay the taxes, and die young so that the rich can stay rich and the poor can stay alive just long enough to produce the next generation of workers. The day wears on, and your mother's merchandise slowly disappears. The vegetables go first, because vegetables spoil quickly and everyone needs something green in their diet, even if it's mostly brown around the edges. The eggs take longer because eggs are expensive, and people have to think carefully about whether they can afford protein this week, or if they should stick to bread, and hope for the best. The cloth is the hardest sell, because cloth is a luxury item, and luxury items are for people who have already solved the basic problem of staying alive. But eventually, a merchant's wife takes a fancy to the pattern and buys enough to make a new sleeve for her husband's tunic. It's not much money, but it's more than you had this morning, and in medieval Paris, that counts as progress. By midday, the sun is beating down on the market with the enthusiasm of a vengeful deity. There's no shade except under the awnings of the permanent stalls, and those spots are reserved for people who pay rent to the market authorities. Everyone else bakes in the sun, sweats through their clothes, and tries not to think about how much water they're losing through their skin. The heat brings out new smells from the merchandise around you. The fish that smelled bad this morning now smells like a biological weapon. The meat that was questionable at dawn is now clearly a health hazard. The vegetables that were merely wilted are now approaching a state of liquid decomposition. And yet people keep buying because they need food, and this is the food that's available, and the alternative is starvation. Your mother sends you to buy bread for the family's midday meal, giving you a handful of coins and specific instructions about which baker to visit and what to look for in terms of quality. This is more complicated than it sounds because bread in medieval Paris comes in many varieties, most of them terrible. The best bread is made from wheat flour and is white, soft, and relatively free of foreign objects. This bread costs more than most people can afford and is usually reserved for the wealthy. The bread that most people eat is made from barley, rye, or a mixture of grains, often supplemented with whatever else is available. Ground beans, peas, acorns, or in really bad times, sawdust and clay. You make your way through the crowd to your mother's preferred baker, a man named Guillaume who has a reputation for honest dealing and bread that usually won't kill you immediately. His stall is busy, because word gets around quickly in medieval Paris about which merchants can be trusted and which ones are actively trying to poison their customers. Guillaume's bread looks about as appetizing as bread can look when it's made from questionable ingredients in unsanitary conditions. It's brown, dense, and studded with what he cheerfully describes as extra fiber, but what looks suspiciously like bits of wood and possibly small insects. But it's fresh, it's filling, and Guillaume swears on his mother's grave that he hasn't added any sawdust to this batch. You hand over your coins and receive a loaf that weighs about as much as a small brick and feels about as soft. Guillaume throws in a few kind words about your mother's reputation and a warning about staying away from the fish vendor on the east side of the market, whose latest catch is apparently walking away under its own power. The bread goes into your basket, along with some onions your mother managed to trade for a piece of cloth, and you begin the journey back through the crowd. This is when you discover one of the great dangers of medieval market life. Pickpockets. They work in teams, usually children who can slip through crowds like water and disappear before you realize what's happened. You feel a hand brush against your waist, where you keep your small pouch of coins, and you spin around to see a boy who can't be more than 10 years old backing away with a look of innocent confusion on his face. He's good, but you've been coming to this market long enough to recognize the technique. You grab his wrist and feel him trying to drop your pouch into the hand of an accomplice who melts away into the crowd the moment he realizes the plan has failed. The boy starts crying and protesting his innocence in a voice that could melt stone, claiming he was just trying to steady himself in the crowd and didn't mean to bump into you. This performance draws a small audience of market-goers who offer various opinions about what should be done with young thieves, ranging from letting him go with a warning to cutting off his hand, which is apparently the official punishment for theft in medieval Paris. You recover your pouch, which still contains your money, and decide that the boy has learned his lesson. This might be a mistake because mercy is often interpreted as weakness in medieval Paris. But you remember being 10 years old and hungry and desperate, and you can't bring yourself to ruin a child's life over a few copper coins that you wouldn't miss if they were gone. The boy disappears into the crowd with a speed that suggests this wasn't his first failed attempt at theft, and you continue back to your mother's stall with a heightened awareness of everyone around you. Trust is a luxury in medieval Paris, and luxury is something you can't afford. Back at your mother's stall, you help her pack up the remaining merchandise as the afternoon heat becomes unbearable. The sun is beating down on the market with the intensity of divine punishment, and the smell of rotting food has reached levels that would be considered biological warfare in any civilized era. Your mother counts her earnings for the day. A handful of copper coins that might be enough to buy dinner if you're careful about portions and don't mind eating things that are only technically food. But the day is far from over because in medieval Paris, making enough money to survive requires working from before dawn until after dark, and even then you're never quite sure you've done enough. Your mother sends you to deliver some finished cloth to one of her regular customers, a merchant who lives in the slightly better part of town, where the buildings are only moderately likely to collapse, and the streets are paved with stones instead of compressed filth. The walk across Paris gives you a tour of medieval urban planning, which is to say there is no planning whatsoever. Streets wind and twist like they were designed by someone having a fever dream. They change width randomly, sometimes narrowing to the point where you have to turn sideways to pass between buildings, sometimes opening into small squares where people gather to conduct business, gossip, or watch public executions. Every neighborhood has its own character, and by character, I mean its own unique combination of smells, dangers, and social problems. The tanner's quarter reeks of animal hides and the chemicals used to process them. The metalworkers' district rings with the constant sound of hammering and fills the air with smoke and sparks. The scholars' area around the university is marginally cleaner, but filled with young men who think they're smarter than everyone else, and aren't shy about expressing that opinion loudly and at length. As you walk, you pass the workshops where the real work of medieval Paris gets done. These aren't the romanticized craft shops of popular imagination. They're dark, dangerous, poorly ventilated spaces where people work with tools that can maim or kill, using techniques that haven't changed in centuries, producing goods that will be sold for barely enough to keep the workers alive. You stop outside a blacksmith shop and watch through the open door as the smith works red-hot iron with nothing but leather aprons and bare hands for protection. The heat from the forge is overwhelming, even from the street. Inside, it must be like working in hell, which might actually be an improvement given the working conditions. The smith's arms are covered with burns from flying sparks. His lungs are full of smoke and metal dust, and his hearing is probably gone from years of hammering on anvils. Next door, a carpenter is building furniture with tools that look like they were forged during the reign of Charlemagne. His hands are a map of cuts, splinters, and calluses. His back is permanently bent from hunching over his work, and his fingers are missing tips from various encounters with sharp edges and moving parts. This is what happens to people who work with their hands in an era before safety regulations, workers' compensation, or the basic understanding that maybe people shouldn't have to risk death just to make a living. In a weaver's shop, women work looms that are older than their grandmothers, creating cloth in a process that destroys their eyesight, ruins their backs, and fills their lungs with fiber dust. They start working before dawn and continue until they can't see the threads anymore. They earn barely enough to feed themselves, and when they're too old or too sick to work, they're replaced by younger women who haven't yet learned that this job will slowly kill them. The leather workers have it even worse. They work with animal hides in various stages of decay, using chemicals that would be banned in any sane society. The smell from the tanning pits is so bad that people cross the street to avoid it. The workers' hands are permanently stained from the dyes and chemicals. Their skin is cracked and bleeding from constant exposure to caustic substances, and their life expectancy is probably measured in months rather than years. But perhaps the most dangerous job in medieval Paris is construction work. You pass several building sites where workers are constructing new buildings or repairing old ones, and it's like watching a medieval version of extreme sports. Men balance on narrow beams, several stories above the ground, with no safety equipment except their own sense of balance. They haul massive stones up to dangerous heights using ropes and pulleys that look like they're held together with prayer and good intentions. At one site, you watch a group of workers trying to install a wooden beam on the third floor of a building. They're using a system of ropes and leverage that would make a modern engineer have nightmares. One wrong move, one frayed rope, one moment of inattention, and several people are going to fall to their deaths. And this is just Tuesday in medieval Paris. Nobody seems particularly concerned about the danger, because danger is just part of life, like hunger, disease, and the smell of human waste. You deliver your mother's cloth to the merchant, who examines it critically before paying about half what it's worth and complaining about the quality the entire time. This is normal. Merchants in medieval Paris operate on the principle that everything is overpriced and nothing is good enough, and they express this opinion loudly and frequently to anyone who will listen. The merchant's house gives you a glimpse into how the other half lives. If by other half you mean the tiny percentage of people who have managed to accumulate enough wealth to live like human beings instead of animals. The house has multiple rooms, actual furniture, and windows with real glass instead of oiled parchment. The floors are covered with rushes that are changed regularly, and the walls are decorated with tapestries that actually look clean. But even here, in relative luxury, the realities of medieval life intrude. The glass windows are small and thick, letting in barely enough light to see by. The furniture is basic and uncomfortable by modern standards. And despite the merchant's wealth, he still lives in fear of disease, crime, and the political instability that could wipe out his fortune overnight. On your way back through the city, you encounter one of the regular features of medieval Parisian life: a public execution. A crowd has gathered in a small square to watch a man being hanged for theft. The condemned man is standing on a cart with a rope around his neck, while a priest reads him his last rites and a public official reads out his crimes. The crowd is in a festive mood because public executions are free entertainment in medieval Paris. People bring their children to watch, vendors sell food and drink, and everyone treats it like a combination of sporting event and moral lesson. The man being executed looks about your age, thin and desperate. Probably someone who stole food because he was starving and got caught by someone with more political connections than compassion. When the cart is pulled away and the man drops, the crowd cheers like they're watching a successful acrobatic performance. Children clap their hands, adults nod approvingly, and vendors immediately start hawking their wares to the dispersing crowd. You realize that this could easily be you up there if you made the wrong choice, stole from the wrong person, or just had bad luck at the wrong moment. The casual attitude toward death is one of the most unsettling aspects of medieval Paris. Life is cheap, violence is common, and people die from things that would be minor inconveniences in any modern society. The man you just watched die might have stolen a loaf of bread to feed his family, but the legal system doesn't distinguish between theft motivated by hunger and theft motivated by greed. Steal a penny, hang by the neck until dead. But it's not just criminal justice that's brutal. The entire medical system, such as it is, operates on principles that are more likely to kill you than cure you. You pass a barber surgeon's shop where a man is having a tooth pulled with no anesthesia except a wooden stick to bite on. The barber is using a pair of pliers that look like they were borrowed from a blacksmith, and the patient's screams can be heard 3 blocks away. Next to the barber surgeon is an apothecary who sells medicines that are mostly herbal preparations with no proven effectiveness and several known side effects, including death. The apothecary's window display includes jars of mysterious powders, dried animal parts, and liquids that glow with unnatural colors. The labels promise cures for everything from headaches to plague, But the fine print, if there were fine print, would probably mention that the cure might be worse than the disease. Medical knowledge in medieval Paris is a fascinating combination of ancient superstition, religious dogma, and pure guesswork. Doctors believe that disease is caused by an imbalance of the four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Treatment involves bloodletting, purging, and various other procedures designed to restore balance by removing whatever the patient has too much of, which usually turns out to be blood and life force. If you get sick in medieval Paris, your best bet is to stay home, drink plenty of liquids, and hope your body can fight off whatever's wrong without any medical intervention. Because medical intervention in 1325 is more likely to kill you than help you, and the doctors will charge you money for the privilege of hastening your death. But staying home when you're sick is a luxury that most people can't afford, because not working means not eating, and not eating means dying anyway. Just more slowly, and with the added humiliation of poverty. So people work when they're sick, spreading disease to everyone around them, creating the perfect conditions for epidemics that can wipe out entire neighborhoods in a matter of weeks. You're beginning to feel the effects of a full day in medieval Paris. Your feet are sore from walking on rough cobblestones, your throat is dry from breathing air that's more dust and smoke than oxygen, and your eyes are watering from the constant assault of unpleasant smells. Your clothes are soaked with sweat and stained with various substances that you've encountered throughout the day, and you're starting to understand why people in medieval Paris didn't live very long. But the day is still not over, because you need to help your family prepare for evening, which brings its own set of challenges and dangers. As the sun begins to set, Paris transforms from a moderately dangerous city into a genuinely terrifying one. The streets become darker, the crowds become more desperate, and the normal rules of civilized behavior, such as they are, become even more flexible. Evening in medieval Paris means lighting candles and oil lamps, which are expensive and dangerous. Fire is a constant threat in a city built mostly of wood and thatch, and fires spread quickly through neighborhoods where buildings are packed closely together and water is scarce. Every year, significant portions of the city burn down, and every year, they're rebuilt in exactly the same way, because nobody has figured out how to build fire-resistant structures that poor people can afford. You help your family prepare their evening meal, which consists of whatever food you are able to buy at the market, supplemented by whatever leftovers you've been able to preserve from previous meals. Tonight's dinner is a stew made from the onions you bought, some questionable meat that your mother traded for a piece of cloth, and various roots and herbs that might be edible or might just add flavor to what could be your last meal. The cooking is done over an open fire in the common area of your building, which you share with 6 other families. The room fills with smoke because the chimney doesn't draw properly, and everyone's eyes water as they try to prepare food in conditions that would challenge a professional chef. The fire is fed with whatever fuel the families can find: wood scraps, dried animal dung, and occasionally pieces of furniture that have reached the end of their useful life. While the stew cooks, you listen to the evening entertainment, which consists mainly of gossip, rumors, and speculation about the various scandals, crimes, and catastrophes that have befallen your neighbors. Medieval Paris is a small community in some ways, and everyone knows everyone else's business whether they want to or not. Privacy is a luxury that only the wealthy can afford, and even they don't get much of it. Tonight's gossip includes updates on the ongoing feud between 2 merchant families that has escalated to the point where they're hiring thugs to beat up each other's employees. There's also news about a woman in the next neighborhood who was accused of witchcraft after her neighbor's cow died mysteriously, and speculation about whether the new bishop is going to crack down on the various illegal activities that keep the local economy functioning. The conversation is interrupted by the sound of fighting in the street outside. This is normal enough that nobody seems particularly concerned, but the sound of breaking pottery and violent cursing suggests that this might be more serious than the usual evening scuffles. Your father goes to the window to investigate and reports that 2 groups of young men are settling some sort of dispute with clubs, knives, and considerable enthusiasm. Street fights are a regular feature of medieval Parisian life because there's no effective police force, and young men with too much energy and too little hope tend to settle their differences violently. These fights usually don't last long because medieval weapons are effective and medieval medicine is not, so people either win quickly or die trying. Tonight's fight ends when someone throws a cobblestone with enough accuracy to end the dispute permanently. The evening meal is finally ready, and you gather around the common pot to share the stew. It tastes about as good as you'd expect from a mixture of questionable ingredients cooked over a smoky fire, but it's hot, it's filling, and it probably won't kill you immediately. The meat is tough enough to use as leather. The vegetables are mushy enough to drink. But it's food. And food is life, even when it tastes like death. After dinner, there's still work to be done because medieval life doesn't stop just because the sun has set. Your mother continues her weaving by candlelight. Your father repairs tools and equipment, and you help with various household tasks that have been accumulating throughout the day. Everyone works until they're too tired to continue, because rest is a luxury that only comes after all the necessary tasks have been completed. The building around you settles into its evening rhythm. Children cry themselves to sleep on straw mattresses. Adults argue in whispers about money and work, and someone on the floor below is coughing violently enough to suggest that they might not see morning. The walls are thin enough that you can hear everything your neighbors are doing, saying and feeling, which means that privacy is impossible and secrets are rare. As the night deepens, you become aware of the sounds of the city around you. Dogs barking in the distance, horses clopping on cobblestones, the occasional scream that might be someone being murdered, or might just be someone having a particularly bad dream. The night watch makes its rounds, calling out the hours and trying to maintain some semblance of order in a city that becomes increasingly lawless after dark. The night watch consists of a few dozen men armed with clubs and lanterns who patrol the streets trying to prevent the worst crimes while avoiding getting killed in the process. They're not particularly effective because they're outnumbered, outgunned, and underpaid. But their presence is better than nothing, which is what most neighborhoods had before the watch was established. But even with the night watch, Paris after dark is dangerous territory. Thieves, murderers, and various other criminals operate freely in the poorly lit streets. People disappear regularly, and their bodies are sometimes found in the Seine days later, if they're found at all. Going out at night without a very good reason is considered suicidal, and going out alone is considered an act of pure madness. Your family prepares for sleep by banking the fire, checking the door to make sure it's securely barred, and arranging themselves on their sleeping mats in a configuration that maximizes warmth, while minimizing the chance of accidentally kicking someone in the face during the night. Sleep in medieval Paris is not the peaceful rest of modern life. It's a necessary evil that leaves you vulnerable to cold, disease, fire, theft, murder, and various other dangers that lurk in the darkness. You lie down on your straw mattress and try to get comfortable, which is impossible given that the straw is lumpy, the blanket is scratchy, and something with too many legs is crawling across your ankle. The building creaks and groans around you like a living thing in pain, and you can hear rats scurrying through the walls in search of food, warmth, and places to raise their families. Sleep comes slowly and uneasily, because your mind is processing the events of the day and trying to prepare for the challenges of tomorrow. You've survived another day in medieval Paris, but survival is a temporary condition, and tomorrow will bring new opportunities for disease, injury, crime, and death. The lucky people die quickly from accidents or violence. The unlucky ones die slowly from disease, starvation, or old age, which in medieval Paris means anything over 30. But even as you lie there contemplating the various ways your life could end, you can't help but feel a certain pride in having made it through another day. You've earned some money, avoided serious injury, and managed to get enough food to keep your family alive for another 24 hours. In medieval Paris, that counts as a victory, even if it's a small and temporary one. The night brings its own set of challenges and dangers. The temperature drops significantly after sunset because medieval buildings have no insulation and minimal heating. You burrow deeper into your blanket and try to conserve body heat while listening to the sounds of your family doing the same thing. Everyone clusters together not just for emotional comfort but for physical warmth, because hypothermia is a real threat even in the supposedly milder climate of medieval France. Outside, you can hear the sounds of the city settling into its nighttime routine. Tavern keepers are ejecting their last customers. Night soilmen are beginning their rounds to collect human waste from public latrines. and various nocturnal criminals are starting their shifts. The boundary between legal and illegal activity becomes even more blurred at night, when desperation meets opportunity in dark alleys and empty streets. The church bells ring out the hours through the night, providing the only reliable way to track time in an era before mechanical clocks were common. The bells also serve as a reminder of the religious framework that supposedly governs medieval life, though in practice, people tend to interpret religious law in whatever way best serves their immediate needs for survival. You drift in and out of sleep, awakened periodically by the sound of someone coughing up blood, a baby crying from hunger, or a drunk stumbling through the streets singing songs that would make a sailor blush. Medieval life doesn't stop for sleep, and sleep doesn't provide much protection from the realities of medieval existence. Around midnight, you're awakened by the sound of someone pounding on the building's main door and shouting about fire. This is every medieval resident's worst nightmare because fire spreads quickly through buildings made of timber and thatch, and firefighting technology consists mainly of forming bucket brigades and hoping for the best. Everyone in the building immediately jumps up and begins preparing to evacuate, even though it turns out to be a false alarm caused by someone mistaking smoke from a chimney for the beginning of a conflagration. But the incident reminds you of how precarious life is in medieval Paris. Fire, disease, crime, and violence are constant threats that can destroy everything you've worked for in a matter of minutes. Security is an illusion, safety is temporary, and disaster is always just one mistake away. The false fire alarm also gives you a chance to see your neighbors in a state of panic, which reveals some interesting things about medieval human nature. Some people immediately try to save their most valuable possessions, which usually turn out to be small amounts of money or food. Others try to help their families escape, and a few try to help their neighbors, even though they barely have enough resources to take care of themselves. But the most revealing thing about the incident is how quickly people return to sleep once the danger has passed. In medieval Paris, you learn to live with constant threat and uncertainty because the alternative is to go insane from worry. People develop a kind of fatalistic acceptance of danger that allows them to function despite knowing that death could come at any moment from any number of causes. You eventually fall back asleep, only to be awakened again by the sound of someone being violently ill in the next room. This is also normal, because medieval food is a constant source of digestive distress, and medieval medicine has no effective treatments for food poisoning, except waiting to see whether the patient survives long enough to develop immunity or dies from dehydration. The night continues with a series of minor crises and disturbances that remind you why medieval people didn't live very long. Someone's child develops a fever that could be anything from a minor cold to bubonic plague. Someone else starts having chest pains that could be indigestion or a heart attack. And someone on the floor below begins making the kind of gurgling sounds that suggest they might not see morning. But despite all the drama and trauma, the night eventually passes, and you survive to see another dawn in medieval Paris. As the first light filters through your oiled parchment window, you realize that you've accomplished something that many people in medieval Paris never manage. You've lived through an entire day and night without dying. This might not seem like much of an achievement, but in a city where people regularly die from infected cuts, contaminated water, spoiled food, violent crime, industrial accidents, and dozens of diseases that modern medicine treats with antibiotics, surviving 24 hours is actually quite an accomplishment. But your sense of achievement is short-lived because you realize that now you have to do it all over again. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new dangers, and new opportunities for disease, injury, and death. The cycle of medieval life is relentless. Wake up, work, eat, sleep, and hope you're lucky enough to repeat the process the next day. And this is just one day in medieval Paris. Imagine living this way for weeks, months, or years. Imagine raising children in these conditions, knowing that most of them won't survive to adulthood. Imagine growing old in a world where old age means anything over 35, and where medical care consists mainly of prayer and bloodletting. The people of medieval Paris weren't heroes or saints. They were ordinary human beings trying to survive in extraordinary circumstances. They dealt with problems that would challenge modern people who have access to advanced technology, modern medicine, and social safety nets. And somehow, many of them managed to find joy, love, and meaning in lives that were brutal, short, and filled with suffering. But you, with your modern expectations of comfort, safety, and longevity, probably wouldn't last a day in medieval Paris. The smell alone would be enough to send you running for the nearest airport, if airports existed, which they don't. The food would make you sick, the water would kill you, and the working conditions would violate so many modern safety regulations that the entire city would be shut down by health inspectors. Medieval Paris was a place where life was cheap, death was common, and survival was a daily challenge that required strength, cunning, and a considerable amount of luck. It was a city of contradictions, beautiful and ugly, civilized and barbaric, spiritual and material. And while it produced great art, literature, and architecture, it did so at a human cost that would be considered unacceptable by any modern standard. As dawn breaks over medieval Paris, you're awakened not by an alarm clock, but by the sound of someone dying in the room next door. This is becoming a disturbingly regular occurrence, because people in medieval Paris die with the frequency of seasonal allergies in modern times. The death rattle echoes through the thin walls, followed by the sound of family members wailing and arguing about who's going to pay for the funeral, assuming they can afford one. You stumble out of bed for your second day in medieval Paris, and immediately realize that yesterday's experiences have taken their toll on your body. Your joints ache from sleeping on a straw mattress that offers about as much support as a wet newspaper. Your feet are covered with cuts and infections from walking barefoot on streets that are basically open sewers paved with cobblestones. And your digestive system is in open rebellion from eating food that would be rejected by buzzards. But complaining about your physical condition is a luxury you can't afford, because today brings new challenges that make yesterday's miseries look like a pleasant vacation. First on the agenda is dealing with the consequences of medieval sanitation, which is to say there is no sanitation and the consequences are everywhere. The building's communal privy, such as it is, hasn't been cleaned since the foundation was laid. It's basically a hole in the ground that's been accumulating human waste for decades, creating a biological hazard that would require a hazmat team to handle safely in any civilized era. The smell emanating from this facility is so powerful that it's actually visible as a kind of greenish haze that hangs in the air like the ghost of every meal that ever went wrong. But you have to use it anyway because the alternative is relieving yourself in the streets, which is actually legal in medieval Paris but socially frowned upon, especially during daylight hours. You hold your breath, say a quick prayer to whatever saint handles sewage emergencies, and descend into the privy, which is like stepping into the seventh circle of hell, if hell were specifically designed to punish people through olfactory torture. The experience is mercifully brief, because prolonged exposure to the privy's atmosphere would probably cause permanent lung damage. You emerge gasping for fresh air, only to remember that there is no fresh air in medieval Paris, just different gradations of toxic atmosphere, depending on which neighborhood you're in and which way the wind is blowing. Your second task of the day is to help your family deal with the aftermath of yesterday's market adventure. Your mother is counting and recounting the coins she earned, trying to figure out how to stretch them far enough to buy food for the family for the next few days. Medieval economics operates on the principle that everything costs more than you can afford, and nothing lasts as long as you need it to. The coins themselves are a source of constant anxiety, because medieval currency is unreliable at best. The copper coins are often clipped, meaning people have shaved off bits of metal to sell separately. The silver coins are frequently debased, meaning they contain less precious metal than they're supposed to. And counterfeit coins are so common that every transaction involves examining the money carefully to make sure it's real, which is difficult when you can't read and have never seen enough legitimate currency to know what to look for. But even if the money is real and undamaged, there's no guarantee that it will buy what you need. Prices fluctuate wildly based on factors that are completely beyond your control. Weather, politics, disease, warfare, and the general mood of merchants who seem to enjoy making poor people's lives more difficult. A loaf of bread that cost 2 copper coins yesterday might cost 3 today if the baker's wife had a bad dream about wheat. Your mother sends you back to Les Halles to buy food for the day, armed with a few coins and detailed instructions about what to buy, how much to pay, and which merchants to avoid because they're known to sell spoiled food to customers who don't know any better. This assumes, of course, that there's any food available that isn't spoiled, which is an optimistic assumption in medieval Paris. The walk to the market gives you another opportunity to observe the fascinating variety of ways that people can suffer in medieval Paris. You pass a group of lepers who have been expelled from the city and are living in makeshift shelters outside the walls. Leprosy is one of the most feared diseases of the medieval period, not just because it's incurable and eventually fatal, but because it's highly contagious and causes visible disfigurement that makes sufferers social outcasts. The lepers are required by law to carry bells and announce their presence so that healthy people can avoid them. They survive on charity, when they can get it, and on whatever food they can scavenge from garbage heaps. Their lives are a constant struggle against disease, starvation, and social isolation, and most of them don't survive very long after being diagnosed. But leprosy is just one of many diseases that plague medieval Paris. Bubonic plague, typhoid, dysentery, smallpox, tuberculosis, and dozens of other illnesses spread freely through the population because people live in crowded, unsanitary conditions with no understanding of how disease transmission works. Medieval medicine attributes most illnesses to an imbalance of the four humours or to divine punishment for moral failings, which means that treatments are usually ineffective and sometimes actively harmful. You pass a public bathhouse, which might seem like a sign of civilization until you realize that medieval bathhouses are basically disease incubators, where people share contaminated water while social diseases spread through the population like wildfire. The water is rarely changed, the facilities are never cleaned, and the customers include everyone from merchants to prostitutes to people with communicable skin conditions. The bathhouse also serves as a brothel, because in medieval Paris, commerce and prostitution are often indistinguishable. Sex workers operate openly throughout the city, serving customers who range from wealthy merchants to desperate labourers. The profession is dangerous, poorly paid, and offers no protection from violence, disease, or exploitation. But for many women, it's the only way to avoid starvation. Prostitution is technically illegal, but widely tolerated because it's considered a necessary evil that prevents even worse crimes like rape and adultery. The church condemns it officially, while unofficially recognizing that banning it entirely would be impossible in a city where poverty and desperation drive people to do whatever they must to survive. You continue toward Les Halles, passing through neighborhoods that specialize in different kinds of human misery. The Université district is filled with students who think they're intellectuals but are really just young men with too much time and too little money. They spend their days arguing about philosophy and theology while living in conditions that would challenge the hardest medieval peasant. Student life in medieval Paris is a combination of intensive academic study and extreme poverty. Students live in cramped quarters, eat terrible food, and often go into debt to pay for their education. Many of them never finish their studies because they run out of money, get sick, or simply give up in despair. Those who do graduate often find that their education doesn't prepare them for the realities of medieval life, which values practical skills over theoretical knowledge. The students also contribute to the general chaos of medieval Paris through their enthusiastic participation in riots, street fights, and various other forms of public disorder. University riots are a regular feature of Parisian life, often triggered by disputes over academic freedom, political issues, or the quality of food in student quarters. These riots can last for days, and sometimes result in significant property damage and loss of life. In the artisans' quarter, you observe the medieval guild system in action, which is a fascinating combination of professional organization and legalized extortion. Guilds control every aspect of their members' professional lives, from the training of apprentices to the pricing of finished goods. They also control who can enter their profession, how much they can produce, and where they can sell their products. The guild system is designed to protect established craftsmen from competition, while ensuring consistent quality in manufactured goods. In practice, it creates a rigid hierarchy that makes social mobility almost impossible and stifles innovation by forbidding any changes to traditional production methods. If you want to become a blacksmith, for example, you must serve as an apprentice for 7 years, then work as a journeyman for several more years, then produce a masterpiece that demonstrates your skills, and finally pay substantial fees to join the guild. But even after jumping through all these hoops, you're still subject to guild regulations that control every aspect of your professional life. You can't work at night because that would give you an unfair advantage over competitors who respect traditional working hours. You can't use new tools or techniques because innovation is considered cheating. And you can't charge lower prices because that would undercut other guild members. The guild system also enforces a strict separation between different crafts. A carpenter can't do metalwork, a blacksmith can't work with leather, and a baker can't brew beer. This specialization makes sense in theory, but creates practical problems when people need multiple services or when craftsmen want to diversify their skills to increase their income. Guild enforcement is handled through a combination of peer pressure, economic sanctions, and physical violence. Guild members who violate regulations can be fined, expelled, or beaten by their colleagues. Non-guild members who try to practice regulated trades are subject to even harsher treatment, including having their tools confiscated and their workshops destroyed. As you approach Leal, you notice that the market seems more chaotic than usual, which is saying something because Leal on a normal day resembles a riot that accidentally became a commercial enterprise. Today's extra chaos is caused by the arrival of a group of foreign merchants who are trying to sell exotic goods from distant lands. Their presence has triggered a complex series of negotiations, arguments, and minor conflicts as local merchants try to figure out how to deal with competition from people who don't understand local customs and pricing conventions. The foreign merchants have set up their stalls in the center of the market, where they're displaying goods that most Parisians have never seen before. Spices from the East, silk from China, precious stones from India, and various other luxury items that cost more than most people earn in a lifetime. The merchants themselves are dressed in elaborate robes and speak languages that sound like music compared to the harsh consonants of medieval French. But their exotic appearance and mysterious goods have also triggered suspicion and hostility among some of the local population. Medieval Parisians are generally suspicious of foreigners, especially wealthy foreigners who seem to have access to goods and knowledge that aren't available locally. There are whispers about black magic, poisoned goods, and secret alliances with enemies of the French crown. The suspicion is partly religious, because the foreign merchants might be Muslims, Jews, or adherents of other non-Christian religions that are viewed with hostility by the medieval church. It's also partly economic, because successful foreign merchants represent competition for local businesses and evidence that there are other ways of organizing commerce and society. But mostly it's simple xenophobia based on fear of the unknown and resentment of people who seem to be more successful and sophisticated than the local population. Medieval Paris is a provincial city despite its size and importance, and its residents often react to reminders of the wider world with a mixture of fascination and hostility. You find your mother's preferred vendors and begin the process of buying food for your family's meals. This involves not just selecting merchandise and negotiating prices, but also conducting a careful inspection of everything you're considering purchasing to make sure it's safe to eat. Medieval food safety standards are basically non-existent, so consumers have to rely on their own knowledge and experience to avoid buying products that will kill them. The bread vendor is offering several different grades of bread, ranging from expensive white loaves made from wheat flour to cheap brown loaves that contain significant amounts of non-grain filler. You examine the brown bread carefully, looking for signs of mold, insect infestation, or adulteration with sawdust or clay. The bread you select looks reasonably safe, though it's dense enough to use as a building material and hard enough to break teeth. The fish vendor's merchandise is more challenging to evaluate because fish spoils quickly, and the signs of spoilage aren't always obvious to untrained consumers. You rely on the traditional medieval method of food inspection. Smell it carefully and hope for the best. The fish you select doesn't smell actively rotten, though it has the kind of aroma that suggests it's been dead for a while and is eager to return to the earth. The meat vendor is offering products that would horrify modern health inspectors, but are considered normal in medieval Paris. The meat has been hanging in the open air for days, covered with flies, and beginning to change color in interesting ways. But it's protein, and protein is scarce and expensive, so you buy a small piece and hope that cooking it thoroughly will eliminate whatever harmful bacteria have taken up residence. The vegetable vendors are selling produce that ranges from merely wilted to actively decomposing. Medieval agriculture doesn't produce the uniform, perfect vegetables that modern consumers expect, and medieval storage methods don't preserve freshness very well. You select vegetables that look like they might survive long enough to be cooked and eaten, though you're not optimistic about their nutritional value. The grain vendor is selling various cereals that form the basis of the medieval diet. Most of the grain looks reasonably good, though some of it shows signs of mold or insect damage. Medieval people are accustomed to eating grain that contains small amounts of foreign matter because perfect grain is a luxury that only the wealthy can afford. But even after carefully selecting your purchases, you still have to worry about being cheated in the transaction process. Medieval merchants are notorious for using false weights and measures, shortchanging customers, and selling inferior goods at premium prices. Every purchase involves a complex negotiation process where both parties try to maximize their advantage while minimizing their risks. The weighing process is particularly problematic because scales are often inaccurate and weights are frequently tampered with. Merchants use various tricks to make their merchandise appear heavier than it actually is, while customers try to spot these deceptions without being obvious about their suspicion. It's a game that everyone plays but nobody acknowledges directly. Currency exchange is another source of potential fraud because different regions use different coinage systems and the value of money fluctuates based on political and economic conditions. Merchants often try to pass off foreign coins at inflated exchange rates, while customers try to avoid being stuck with money that won't be accepted by other vendors. The entire market experience is exhausting because it requires constant vigilance against fraud, theft, and various other forms of exploitation. You can't relax for a moment because relaxation is an invitation to be cheated, robbed, or sold something that will make you sick. Medieval commerce operates on the principle that every transaction is a battle and only the most cunning and suspicious survive. After completing your purchases, you begin the journey back through the city, carrying your food supplies and trying to avoid the various hazards that make medieval Paris dangerous for pedestrians. The streets are crowded with people, animals, and vehicles, all moving in different directions with no traffic rules or safety regulations. Horses and oxen pulling carts have the right of way simply because they're bigger and stronger than pedestrians. If you don't get out of the way fast enough, you'll be trampled or run over, and nobody will consider it the driver's fault. Medieval traffic accidents are common and often fatal because there's no organized system for handling emergencies and no effective medical treatment for serious injuries. The streets themselves are hazardous because they're poorly maintained and filled with obstacles. Loose cobblestones can turn ankles, potholes can trap feet, and the constant layer of waste material makes everything slippery and unpredictable. Walking in medieval Paris requires the balance of a tightrope walker and the reflexes of a professional athlete. You also have to watch out for falling objects, because medieval building codes don't exist, and people regularly drop things from upper-story windows. Chamber pots are emptied without warning, tools fall from construction sites, and occasionally entire sections of buildings collapse onto the street below. Medieval insurance doesn't exist either, so if you're injured by falling debris, you're responsible for your own medical expenses and lost income. The human hazards are just as dangerous as the physical ones. Pickpockets work the crowds constantly, looking for easy targets who aren't paying attention to their surroundings. Street gangs control certain neighborhoods and demand payment from anyone who wants to pass through safely. And desperate people who haven't eaten in days sometimes resort to robbery or violence to get money for food. Beggars are everywhere, displaying their disabilities and diseases in hope of inspiring charity from passers-by. Some of them are genuinely disabled or sick, but others are professional beggars who fake their conditions to increase their income. Medieval people develop a cynical attitude toward beggars because it's often impossible to distinguish between genuine need and calculated fraud. Religious pilgrims also crowd the streets, traveling to various shrines and holy sites in search of miraculous cures for their ailments. Pilgrimage is one of the few forms of travel available to ordinary people in medieval times, but it's dangerous because pilgrims are often robbed or cheated by people who take advantage of their religious devotion and unfamiliarity with local conditions. You pass a group of flagellants who are whipping themselves in public as penance for their sins and to appease God's wrath. Self-mortification is considered a virtuous practice in medieval Christianity, and public displays of suffering are thought to benefit not just the participants but the entire community. The sight of people deliberately inflicting pain on themselves is disturbing but not unusual in medieval Paris. The church bells are ringing constantly, marking religious observances, calling people to prayer, and announcing various civic events. The sound is so persistent that it becomes background noise, but it also serves as a reminder that religious authority pervades every aspect of medieval life. You can't escape the church's influence even if you want to, because it controls education, healthcare, social services, and moral guidance. Religious processions wind through the streets regularly, led by priests carrying religious relics, and followed by crowds of believers seeking divine intervention in their daily struggles. These processions can block traffic for hours and sometimes trigger religious hysteria as people compete to touch sacred objects or holy men who are believed to have healing powers. Street preachers set up on corners and preach sermons about sin, salvation, and the approaching end of the world. Medieval Christianity places heavy emphasis on the afterlife and the various punishments that await sinners who don't repent before they die. This creates a constant atmosphere of anxiety and guilt that affects everyone regardless of their personal level of religious belief. You finally reach your family's building and climb the treacherous staircase to your floor, carrying your food purchases and hoping that nothing spoils before you can cook it. Medieval food preservation is limited to salting, smoking, drying, and keeping things cool in cellars or ice houses when they're available. Most fresh food has to be consumed within a day or two of purchase, which means that meal planning is a constant challenge. Your mother examines your purchases critically, checking each item for signs of spoilage or fraud. She's experienced enough to spot most of the common tricks that vendors use to cheat customers, but even experts sometimes get fooled by particularly skillful fraudsters. Medieval consumer protection consists mainly of word-of-mouth warnings about dishonest merchants and the threat of social ostracism for vendors who develop bad reputations. The family's midday meal preparation begins with the challenging task of turning questionable raw materials into something edible. This involves cleaning vegetables that have been grown in soil, fertilized with human waste, trimming meat that has been hanging in the open air, attracting flies, and examining grain for signs of mold or insect infestation. Medieval cooking methods are basic, but effective at eliminating most harmful bacteria through thorough heating. Boiling, roasting, and frying can make even questionable food relatively safe to eat, assuming that the fuel supply holds out and the cooking fire doesn't spread to the rest of the building. Fire safety is a constant concern in medieval kitchens, because cooking fires are often the source of devastating blazes that destroy entire neighborhoods. The cooking process fills the common room with smoke, because medieval chimneys don't draw efficiently, and cooking fires produce significant amounts of particulate matter. Everyone's eyes water and throats burn, but this is considered normal because effective ventilation systems haven't been invented yet. Long-term exposure to cooking smoke probably contributes to respiratory problems, but people accept it as part of the price of having hot food. While the meal cooks, your family discusses the day's events and plans for the immediate future. Medieval families live in such close quarters that privacy is impossible, and family meetings happen constantly whether people want them or not. Today's discussion focuses on the family's financial situation, which is precarious enough to require careful planning and constant anxiety. Your father's work as a fuller has been irregular lately, because the cloth merchants who employ him have been having problems with their suppliers. Medieval economic systems are fragile and interconnected, so problems in one industry quickly spread to others. When cloth merchants can't get raw materials, fullers don't have work, and when fullers don't have work, their families don't have money for food. Your mother's weaving business is also suffering because people don't have money to spend on new cloth when they're struggling to buy food. Medieval consumers prioritize survival needs over comfort or luxury items, so craftspeople who produce non-essential goods are the first to feel the effects of economic downturns. The family's financial problems are complicated by the need to pay various taxes and fees to different authorities. The royal government collects taxes to fund wars and court expenses. The church collects tithes to support religious activities. The local lord collects fees for the use of mills, ovens, and other essential services. And the city government collects fees for market privileges, building permits, and various other civic services. Medieval taxation is regressive, meaning that poor people pay a higher percentage of their income than wealthy people. This is partly because wealthy people have more political influence and can negotiate better deals, and partly because poor people are easier to collect from, because they can't afford to hire lawyers or flee to other jurisdictions. The tax collection process is also corrupt, because tax collectors are often allowed to keep a percentage of what they collect, which gives them an incentive to overcharge taxpayers and pocket the difference. Medieval people have no effective recourse against tax fraud, because legal systems favor wealthy and powerful people over ordinary citizens. Your family's discussion is interrupted by the arrival of a neighbor who brings news about a recent outbreak of some unidentified disease in a nearby neighborhood. Disease outbreaks are a constant worry in medieval Paris because they can spread rapidly through densely populated areas and kill significant percentages of the population in a matter of weeks. The neighbor describes symptoms that sound like they could be anything from food poisoning to bubonic plague. Medieval people can't distinguish between different diseases because medical knowledge is limited and diagnostic techniques don't exist. This creates a climate of constant anxiety because every minor illness could potentially be the beginning of a deadly epidemic. The family discusses whether they should take any precautions against the disease, but their options are limited. Medieval medicine offers no effective treatments for most illnesses, and preventive measures are based on superstition rather than scientific understanding. The best strategy is usually to avoid contact with sick people and hope that divine providence will protect the faithful. But avoiding sick people is difficult in a city where people live in crowded conditions and have to go out in public to work and buy food. Medieval people understand that diseases spread from person to person, but they don't understand the mechanisms of transmission, so their preventive measures are often ineffective. The conversation turns to more practical matters, like how to stretch the family's food supplies to last until the next market day. Medieval families can't afford to waste food because their margin for error is too small, but food preservation techniques are limited and not always reliable. Every meal requires careful planning to balance nutrition, cost, and shelf life. Your mother begins preparing the midday meal, which will consist of bread, vegetables, and a small amount of meat cooked in a stew that can be stretched to feed the entire family. Medieval cooking emphasizes efficiency and economy over flavor or presentation. The goal is to get maximum nutrition from minimum ingredients while making everything safe to eat. The bread is heated over the fire to make it softer and more digestible. Medieval bread is often so hard that it has to be soaked in liquid or heated before it can be chewed safely. Broken teeth are a common result of trying to eat hard bread without proper preparation. The vegetables are cleaned carefully to remove dirt, insects, and other foreign matter that accumulated during growing and storage. Medieval vegetables are often gritty and require thorough washing, though the water used for washing isn't always clean enough to improve the situation significantly. The meat is examined closely for signs of spoilage before being cut into small pieces and added to the cooking pot. Medieval people are skilled at detecting early signs of meat spoilage, but they also have higher tolerance for questionable food than modern consumers because they don't have the luxury of being too selective. The cooking process is slow because medieval fires don't burn as hot as modern stoves, and cooking vessels are often inefficient. Clay pots and iron cauldrons take time to heat up and don't distribute heat evenly, so food has to be stirred constantly to prevent burning while ensuring that everything cooks thoroughly. While the meal cooks, your family continues discussing their daily struggles and making plans for the future. Medieval life requires constant planning because unexpected events can quickly destroy carefully laid plans. Weather, disease, crime, and political instability all pose threats that must be anticipated and prepared for as much as possible. The smell of cooking food attracts attention from neighbors who might not have been as successful in their daily search for sustenance. Medieval people are generally generous with food when they have enough to share, but they also have to be careful not to give away resources that their own families need for survival. Children from other families gather around the cooking fire, hoping for scraps or leftover food. Medieval children learn early that begging for food is sometimes necessary for survival, and that adults who have food are potential sources of help. The sight of hungry children is heartbreaking but common in medieval Paris. The family's meal is finally ready, and everyone gathers around the common pot to share the stew. Medieval families eat together not just for social reasons, but for practical ones. Sharing food from a common pot ensures that everyone gets their fair share, and nothing is wasted through individual portions that might be too large or too small. The stew tastes about as good as can be expected from ingredients that were barely edible to begin with. But it's hot, filling, and probably won't cause immediate food poisoning. Medieval people develop tolerance for questionable food because they don't have the option of being picky about what they eat. The meal is accompanied by conversation about neighborhood news, family concerns, and plans for the rest of the day. Medieval meals are social events that bring families together and provide opportunities for communication and bonding, despite the challenging living conditions. After the meal, everyone returns to their daily tasks, because medieval life doesn't allow for extended leisure time. There's always work to be done, problems to solve, and challenges to overcome. Rest and relaxation are luxuries that only the wealthy can afford, and even they have to be careful not to appear lazy or self-indulgent. Your afternoon task is to help your father with his work as a fuller, which involves processing cloth to make it thicker, softer, and more durable. This work is physically demanding and potentially dangerous because it involves working with chemicals and equipment that can cause serious injuries if mishandled. The fulling process begins with soaking cloth in large vats filled with water, soap, and sometimes urine, which contains ammonia that helps clean and process the fibers. The smell is overwhelming, but medieval people are accustomed to working with substances that would be considered hazardous waste in modern times. The soaked cloth is then beaten and kneaded to compress the fibers and remove impurities. This work is done by hand or with wooden tools, and it requires significant strength and endurance. Medieval fullers develop powerful arms and shoulders from years of heavy physical labor, but they also suffer from arthritis and other joint problems caused by repetitive motion. The working conditions in the fulling operation are harsh because the work is done in poorly ventilated spaces filled with steam, chemical fumes, and particulate matter from the cloth processing. Medieval workers don't have protective equipment, so they're exposed to whatever hazards their jobs involve. Your father has been doing this work for 20 years, and it shows in his appearance and health. His hands are permanently stained from the chemicals, his back is bent from years of heavy lifting, and his breathing is labored from inhaling fiber dust and chemical vapors. He's probably aged more in 20 years of fulling than most people age in 40 years of normal life. But he's grateful to have work, because unemployment in medieval Paris means starvation. There are no social safety nets, unemployment benefits, or government assistance programs. People who can't work either depend on charity from family and neighbors, or they die from hunger and exposure. The fulling work continues through the afternoon despite the physical discomfort and health hazards involved. Medieval workers don't have the option of taking breaks when they're tired, or stopping work when conditions become dangerous. They work until the job is done, or until they physically can't continue. The work is interrupted periodically by visits from other craftsmen who bring cloth to be processed or pick up finished work. These interactions provide opportunities for news, gossip, and business discussions that help people stay connected to the larger community despite spending most of their time in isolated work environments. Medieval business relationships are based on personal trust and reputation, rather than written contracts or legal protections. People deal with craftsmen they know and trust, and they rely on word-of-mouth recommendations when they need to find new suppliers or customers. Fraud and poor workmanship are punished through social ostracism rather than legal action. The afternoon's work produces enough income to buy food for another day or two, assuming that prices don't increase unexpectedly and that no family emergencies require additional expenses. Medieval financial planning consists mainly of hoping that income and expenses will balance out over time, while preparing for the worst-case scenarios that regularly occur. As evening approaches, you help your father clean up the work area and secure the equipment for the night. Medieval workshops are vulnerable to theft because valuable tools and materials are often stored in buildings that offer minimal security. Workers have to be careful to hide or protect anything that might attract the attention of thieves. The walk home through the darkening streets of Paris provides another opportunity to observe the nighttime transformation of the city. Medieval Paris after dark is a dangerous place where normal rules of behavior don't apply, and where violence is more common than during daylight hours. Street lighting consists of occasional lanterns or torches maintained by residents who can afford the fuel, but most areas are completely dark after sunset. This darkness provides cover for criminals who prey on people traveling alone or carrying valuable items. Medieval people avoid going out at night unless absolutely necessary. and when they do venture out, they travel in groups and carry weapons for protection. The Night Watch patrols the streets with lanterns and weapons, but they're outnumbered and outgunned by the criminal element. Their presence provides some deterrent effect, but they can't be everywhere at once, and they're often corrupt or incompetent. Medieval law enforcement is more about maintaining the appearance of order than actually preventing crime. You finally reach your building and climb the dangerous staircase to your family's quarters, grateful to have survived another day in medieval Paris. The building is settling down for the night, with families preparing meals, tending to sick relatives, and trying to get comfortable in quarters that weren't designed for human habitation. The evening meal consists of leftover stew from the midday cooking session, supplemented by bread that's getting harder and more inedible with each passing hour. Medieval people eat the same food repeatedly because cooking fuel is expensive and food preservation options are limited. After the meal, your family gathers around the fire for the evening's entertainment, which consists mainly of conversation, storytelling, and planning for the next day's challenges. Medieval people don't have books, newspapers, radio, television, or any other forms of mass entertainment, so they create their own amusement through social interaction. The stories people tell reflect the harsh realities of medieval life. Tales of people who died from preventable diseases, families who lost everything to fires or theft, and individuals who overcame seemingly impossible odds to achieve modest success. These stories serve as both entertainment and education, teaching listeners about the dangers they face and the strategies they can use to survive. As the night deepens, your family prepares for sleep by banking the fire, checking the security of doors and windows, and arranging themselves on their sleeping areas. Medieval people go to bed early because artificial lighting is expensive, and because they need to rise at dawn to begin another day of labor. Sleep comes fitfully because the building is filled with the sounds of other families dealing with their own daily struggles. Children cry, adults argue, someone coughs violently, and the rats scurry through the walls, searching for food and nesting materials. Medieval privacy is non-existent, and personal problems become community concerns whether people want them to or not. You lie on your straw mattress and reflect on your experiences during your second day in medieval Paris. You've managed to survive another 24 hours without dying from disease, accident, violence, or starvation, which puts you ahead of many people who weren't as fortunate. But you've also gained a deeper appreciation for just how difficult and dangerous life was for ordinary people in medieval times. Every aspect of daily life in medieval Paris involves risks that would be unacceptable in modern society. The food is contaminated, the water is polluted, the air is toxic, the buildings are unsafe, the streets are dangerous, and the medical care is more likely to kill you than cure you. People live in constant fear of disease, crime, fire, economic disaster, and political upheaval. And yet, somehow, people not only survived, but created art, literature, architecture, and music that we still admire today. They raised families, built communities, and found meaning and joy in lives that were objectively terrible by modern standards. Their resilience and adaptability are remarkable, even if their living conditions were appalling. But you, with your modern expectations of comfort, safety, and longevity, wouldn't last a day in medieval Paris. The physical hardships alone would be overwhelming. The manual labor, the poor nutrition, the unsanitary conditions, the exposure to disease and violence. Add to that the psychological stress of living without security, privacy, or hope for improvement, and it becomes clear that medieval life was a test of human endurance that few modern people could pass. Medieval Paris was a city where survival was an achievement, where reaching adulthood was a victory, and where living to old age was a miracle. It was a place where people were tough because they had to be, where communities were close because isolation meant death, and where faith was strong because hope was often all people had. So the next time you complain about modern inconveniences like traffic jams, long lines, or slow internet connections, remember the people of medieval Paris who considered it a good day if they didn't die from drinking contaminated water or eating spoiled food. Your worst day in the modern world would probably be a pretty good day for a medieval Parisian, and that's something worth remembering when you're feeling sorry for yourself. The morning of your third day in medieval Paris arrives with the now familiar sound of someone dying in the building next door, followed by the equally familiar sound of church bells calling the faithful to morning prayers. You've been in medieval Paris for almost 72 hours now, which makes you something of a survivor by local standards, but you're beginning to understand why most people didn't live past their 30th birthday. Your body is breaking down from the cumulative effects of poor nutrition, contaminated water, toxic air, physical labor, and constant stress. Your digestive system is in revolt from eating food that was questionable when fresh and is now approaching the status of biological warfare. Your respiratory system is clogged with smoke, dust, and various airborne particles that would require hazmat equipment to handle safely in modern times. Your skin is covered with insect bites, rashes, and infections from minor cuts that became major problems due to the absence of antiseptics or antibiotics. Your feet are so damaged from walking barefoot on rough cobblestones covered with human waste that you can barely stand, let alone walk. And your mental state is deteriorating from the constant anxiety of living in a place where death is always just one mistake away. But you can't give up, because giving up in medieval Paris means dying, and dying means disappointing your family, who have invested considerable time and energy in keeping you alive this long. So you drag yourself out of bed and prepare to face another day in the most challenging urban environment in human history. Today's agenda includes helping your mother with laundry, which in medieval Paris is less about getting things clean and more about beating dirt and vermin out of cloth while trying not to fall into the Seine and drown. Medieval laundry techniques haven't evolved much beyond hitting clothes with rocks, which is effective but hard on both the clothes and the people doing the hitting. The laundry expedition requires a trip to the riverbank, where Parisian women gather to wash clothes in water that's contaminated with sewage, industrial waste, and various other substances that make modern pollution look like mountain spring water. The Seine at Paris is essentially an open sewer that happens to flow, but it's the only water source available for washing clothes, so people use it and hope for the best. The riverbank is crowded with women engaged in the complex social ritual of communal laundry, which involves not just washing clothes but exchanging gossip, settling disputes, and conducting various forms of business that can't be handled in more formal settings. Medieval women use laundry time as an opportunity to maintain social networks and share information about everything from childcare to crime prevention. The washing process itself is brutal on both the clothes and the women doing the work. Medieval soap is harsh and caustic, made from animal fats and lye that can cause chemical burns if handled carelessly. The clothes are beaten against rocks or wooden washboards with enough force to remove dirt but also enough force to destroy the fabric over time. Your mother's clothes are already so worn and patched that they barely qualify as clothing anymore, but they're all she has. So she treats them with the care that wealthy people reserve for precious jewelry. Every piece of cloth is valuable because cloth is expensive and difficult to replace, so even the most worn-out garments are mended, patched, and repurposed until they literally fall apart. The other women at the riverbank represent a cross-section of medieval Parisian society, from relatively prosperous merchants' wives to desperately poor widows who wash other people's clothes for money. Their conversations provide insights into the daily struggles and concerns of people trying to survive in an urban environment that seems designed to kill them. One woman is complaining about her husband's drinking problem, which has escalated to the point where he's spending the family's food money on alcohol. Medieval alcoholism is a serious problem, because people drink beer and wine as safer alternatives to contaminated water, but some people develop dependencies that destroy their family's economic stability. Another woman is discussing her daughter's upcoming marriage to a boy from a neighboring family, which represents both an opportunity for economic advancement and a risk that the girl will die in childbirth before she's old enough to vote, if voting existed, which it doesn't. Medieval marriages are primarily economic arrangements designed to combine resources and create alliances between families. A third woman is sharing news about a recent outbreak of some unidentified disease that has killed several people in her neighborhood, including children who were healthy just days before. Disease outbreaks are a constant threat in medieval Paris because people live in crowded, unsanitary conditions that promote the rapid spread of infections. While the women work and talk, their children play games that involve throwing rocks, chasing rats, and generally preparing for adult lives that will be brutally difficult if they survive long enough to reach adulthood. Medieval childhood is brief because children are expected to contribute to family income as soon as they're old enough to work, which is usually around age 7. The laundry process takes most of the morning because medieval washing techniques are time-consuming and labor-intensive. Each piece of clothing has to be soaked, scrubbed, beaten, rinsed, and wrung out by hand, and the water has to be changed frequently because it becomes too dirty to be effective for cleaning. When the washing is finally complete, the clothes have to be dried, which in medieval Paris means hanging them on lines, stretched between buildings, or laying them on bushes and hoping they don't get stolen before they dry. Theft of laundry is a common crime because cloth is valuable and clothes are easy to steal and difficult to trace. The walk back from the riverbank provides another opportunity to observe the daily life of medieval Paris, which continues to function despite the various crises and disasters that affect individual families and neighborhoods. People adapt to circumstances that would overwhelm modern urban dwellers because they don't have the option of moving to safer, cleaner, more comfortable environments. You pass a construction site where workers are building a new church using techniques that haven't changed much since Roman times. The work is dangerous, slow, and expensive, but it provides employment for skilled craftsmen and creates buildings that will last for centuries if they don't collapse during construction, which happens more often than anyone likes to admit. Medieval construction workers have impressive skills and knowledge despite working with primitive tools and techniques. They understand structural engineering, architectural design, and project management well enough to build complex structures that remain standing today. But they also work without safety equipment, building codes, or insurance. So accidents are common and often fatal. The new church is being built to replace an older one that burned down last year, taking several nearby buildings with it and killing dozens of people who couldn't escape the flames quickly enough. Fire is a constant threat in medieval Paris because buildings are made of wood and thatch. Heating and lighting depend on open flames, and firefighting techniques are primitive and often ineffective. You continue through the city, passing various commercial and residential areas that illustrate the economic diversity of medieval Paris. Wealthy merchants live in stone houses with multiple rooms, glass windows, and servants to handle domestic tasks. Middle-class craftsmen live in smaller but comfortable houses with workshops attached. And poor labourers live in overcrowded tenements that barely qualify as human habitation. But even the wealthy live in conditions that would be considered unacceptable by modern standards. Their houses have no running water, no sewage systems, no central heating, and no effective pest control. They eat better food and wear better clothes than poor people, but they're still vulnerable to disease, fire, crime, and all the other hazards of medieval urban life. The afternoon brings new challenges as you help your family prepare for market day, which requires careful planning and considerable physical effort. Medieval market preparation involves not just deciding what to sell, but also figuring out how to transport goods to market, set up displays, and compete with other vendors for customers' attention and money. Your mother has been working for weeks to prepare merchandise for the market, cloth that she's woven during long winter evenings, vegetables from the family garden that have been carefully preserved, and various other items that might appeal to customers who have very little money to spend on anything beyond basic survival needs. The transport of goods to market is a logistical challenge because medieval people don't have cars, trucks, or any other motorized vehicles. Everything has to be carried by hand or transported in carts pulled by animals that are expensive to buy, feed, and maintain. Your family can't afford a cart, so you'll be carrying everything to market in baskets and bundles that will test your physical endurance. The market setup process is complicated by the fact that good locations are limited and controlled by market authorities who charge fees for the privilege of selling goods in prime spots. Your family can't afford a permanent stall, so you'll be setting up in whatever space you can find or afford, which usually means somewhere with poor visibility and heavy foot traffic from people who aren't there to buy anything. The competition for customers is intense because there are more vendors than customers and more goods than money to buy them. Every sale requires careful negotiation and persuasion, and many potential transactions fall through because customers simply can't afford to buy what they need, let alone what they want. Medieval marketing strategies are based on personal relationships, reputation, and word-of-mouth recommendations rather than advertising or promotional campaigns. Vendors who develop reputations for honest dealing and quality merchandise build loyal customer bases, while those who cheat customers or sell inferior goods quickly find themselves without income. Your family's reputation is generally good, but reputation alone isn't enough to guarantee sales in a market where many customers are choosing between buying food and buying other necessities. Medieval consumers have to make difficult decisions about how to allocate their limited resources, and vendors have to compete not just with each other, but with customers' basic survival needs. The day ends as it began, with your family gathered around a fire sharing whatever food you've managed to obtain, discussing the day's successes and failures, and planning for tomorrow's challenges. Medieval life is a constant cycle of work, worry, and hope, with occasional moments of joy and satisfaction when things go better than expected. But even on good days, the underlying realities of medieval life remain unchanged. Disease, crime, fire, and economic disaster are constant threats that can destroy years of careful planning and hard work in a matter of hours. People develop a kind of fatalistic acceptance of uncertainty, because certainty is a luxury that doesn't exist in medieval Paris. As you prepare for sleep at the end of your third day in medieval Paris, you realize that you've gained a new appreciation for the resilience and resourcefulness of people who lived in conditions that would challenge modern survival experts. They didn't just survive. They created communities, raised families, and found meaning in lives that were objectively brutal by contemporary standards. But you also realize that you wouldn't last much longer in medieval Paris without modern medical care, nutrition, and safety equipment. The cumulative effects of poor living conditions are taking their toll on your body and mind, and you're beginning to understand why medieval people aged so quickly and died so young. Medieval Paris was a crucible that tested human endurance, adaptability, and determination. Those who survived were tough, clever, and lucky. Those who didn't survive were forgotten, leaving behind no records of their struggles or dreams. The city was a place where life was cheap but precious, where community was essential for survival, and where every day was a victory against overwhelming odds. So the next time you face modern challenges like traffic jams, bureaucratic delays, or technological frustrations, remember the people of medieval Paris who would have considered your worst day a remarkable blessing. They lived without hope of improvement, without security, and without comfort, yet somehow found the strength to continue. Their legacy isn't just the buildings and artworks they created, but the simple fact that they refused to give up when giving up would have been the rational choice. And that, perhaps, is the most important lesson of medieval Paris. That human beings are capable of surviving and even thriving in conditions that seem impossible, as long as they have each other and the determination to see another sunrise. You wouldn't last a day in medieval Paris, but the people who did deserve our admiration, respect, and gratitude for creating the foundation upon which our safer, cleaner, more comfortable world was built.